A resolution isn't a wish, it's a promise you're making to your future self. Most resolutions fail because people use a one-force strategy for a three-force promise. If your resolution only works on your best day, it's not a resolution, it's a fantasy. Let's make this practical. Every January, millions of people make a resolution. By mid-February, most are gone. If that's been you, it's probably not because the goal was wrong. It's because the plan only worked on your best day, not on your real week. Most advice misses this because it answers the wrong question. It treats resolutions like a motivation problem, or a discipline problem, or a routine problem. But a resolution isn't just one of those problems, it's all three. So in this video, I'll give you a simple map, 3 forces that decide whether a resolution survives. And before we finish, you'll have a 2-minute check you can run on your resolution today. This is training for a better week, weekly training for self-authorship, so your weeks actually go the way you mean. So let's start off by defining what a resolution actually is. Here's the simplest definition I've found. A resolution is a promise to follow through over time. Not a wish, not a vague intention, a promise. And every time you break a promise to yourself, you pay a hidden cost. You trust yourself a little less. It's not dramatic, it's a slow leak. Over time, your own commitments stop carrying weight, and the next resolution starts weaker. Which is exactly why a resolution has to survive your actual life. Low energy, calendar shifts, bad sleep, competing commitments. Because the real question isn't, what would I do on my best day? It's, what will survive my normal days and my bad ones? If a resolution is a promise over time, it's basically saying, I'm going to get from here to there across the next stretch of my life. And any here to there promise inherently has 3 forces. There's a pull force, your North Star, what you're moving toward and why it matters. There's a push force, your starting conditions, your schedule, energy constraints, patterns, current capability. And there's a bridge force, the method, what turns intention into reliable action in real life. Here's a quick way to feel the difference. If you have a pull without a bridge, you care but nothing changes. If you have a bridge without a pull, you can do the motions but it goes dead or you drift. If you have a pull and a bridge, but you ignore push, you build a plan for an imaginary life, and reality breaks it. So the key line for this video is this. Most resolutions fail because people use a one-force strategy for a three-force promise. They try to solve it with more pull or more push or a better bridge, but the promise lives across all 3. Once you see those 3 forces, destination, starting conditions, and a way of traveling, the next question is obvious. How do people actually try to make the promise survive? A resolution strategy is simply the answer to that question. The approach you use to get from here to there, the method you use to trust when real life shows up. And if you listen to the advice out there, you'll hear 3 bets. Some approaches basically say, if the destination matters enough, you'll move. That's a bet on pull. Other approaches say, forget how you feel. You move because you decide you're going to move. End of story. That's a bet on push. Other approaches say, the problem isn't desire or toughness, the problem is routine. Build a method that turns intention into action when you're tired, busy, or distracted. That's a bet on bridge. Each bet points at something real. The problem is trying to run a 3-force promise by overbuilding just one. And once you see that pattern, the whole resolution landscape becomes much easier to organize. Most mainstream resolution advice clusters into 5 strategies. These are my labels, but they're pointing to approaches you already recognize. Inspiration. You try to win through pull, meaning, vision, why. Discipline. You try to win through internal push, grit, willpower, non-negotiables. Accountability and stakes. You try to win through external push, other people, deadlines, consequences. Systems design. You try to win through the bridge, routine, structure, environment, tracking, strengthening execution mechanics. And self-authorship. You try to win by governing the whole promise, keeping pull, push, and bridge aligned, and rebuilding the bridge when life changes. And to keep this grounded, I'll use one example resolution throughout. Let's say the resolution is train 3 times a week. Okay, quick thing. If this is useful, can you check, are you subscribed? This channel is weekly training, practical tools for building self-authorship in real life. I'll run each strategy through the same 5 questions. What it asks you to believe, what it relies on, what it produces, now and later, where it breaks, and what it tells you to do after a miss. In part 1, we'll cover the first 4, the mainstream ones, and in part 2, I'll make self-authorship concrete. The first approach is what I'm calling inspiration. This approach basically says, if I care enough, I'll follow through. So it leans hard on the pull force, the part of a resolution that gives it gravity in your life, what you're moving toward and why it matters enough to choose. You'll recognize this in 2 mainstream lanes: purpose and vision, getting clear on what you want and why, and visualization and manifestation, vision boards, feel the future, the secret style content. With our example, training 3 times a week, the inspiration version sounds like, I'm going to reconnect to why this matters, picture the healthier version of me, and commit to 3 workouts a week. So what does inspiration produce? In the moment, it produces clarity and energy. You feel pulled, and that alone can get you moving for a few days. Over time, it can produce sustained commitment, but only if you can translate that meaning into concrete actions and a method you can repeat. If you don't, the feeling fades and nothing durable gets built. It breaks when real life shows up, because inspiration usually underbuilds push and bridge. You still care, but you slept badly, work runs late, your mood drops, staying in bed looks so much more inviting than the gym. Nothing is wrong with your why, you just hit resistance, and the strategy doesn't have a clear answer for that moment. And when you miss, inspiration usually tells you to do what it knows, reconnect to the why, recommit emotionally. That can help, but often the plan stays the same, so people get caught in a loop. Inspired, recommit, hit the same friction, repeat. So inspiration is excellent for choosing a direction. It's weaker at handling push and building a bridge that survives real life. The second strategy is discipline. This approach basically says, if I'm tough enough, I can override anything. So it leans hard on push, the force of pressure and will, the part of you that says, do it anyway, regardless of mood or motivation. It's about non-negotiables, rules, grit. You'll recognize this in the David Goggins and Jocko Willink style of messaging. Hard standards, no excuses, win the moment. With our example, training 3 times a week, the discipline version sounds like, no matter what, I train Monday, Wednesday, Friday. No excuse, no negotiation. So what does discipline produce? In the moment, it produces output and momentum. It's especially good for resets, clean boundaries, and getting moving fast. Over time, it can build toughness and self-respect, but it's often expensive. It draws down energy, and it tends to make the whole thing brittle. And that brittleness is where it breaks. Discipline breaks when life gets complex. Low sleep, sickness, travel, unexpected workloads, competing commitments. When the costs pile up, it either collapses or escalates. And when you miss, discipline typically gives you one instruction: restart immediately and tighten the rules. That can work, but it also explains why people often quit after a slip. The recovery plan is basically more force. So discipline is powerful for short bursts and simple repeatables. It's weaker when the horizon is long and life is changing, because it doesn't naturally integrate the other forces. It just pushes harder. The third strategy is accountability and stakes. This approach basically says, if someone's watching or there's a cost, I'll do it. So it leans on push, but externalized. Instead of relying on internal willpower, you create pressure from the outside: a coach, a group, a public commitment, deadlines, consequences, and even commitment contracts. This is the backbone of a lot of coaching programs, challenges, and group training, because it genuinely gets people to show up. With our example, training 3 times a week, the accountability version sounds like, I'm training 3 times a week. I report it every Friday, and if I miss, there's a consequence. What does accountability and stakes produce? In the moment, it produces compliance and follow-through. You show up because you don't want the cost: social cost, financial cost, reputational cost. Over time, it can produce real consistency, if you can internalize it, if it turns into something you own. But it can also produce dependence on the structure, resentment, or a kind of performance. You do it because you're being watched, not because you've authored it. And that's where it tends to break. It breaks when the external structure disappears, the coaching ends, the challenge ends, the group stops, or it breaks when you start rebelling against the pressure. And it can keep you locked into something you don't even care about anymore, not because it matters, but because you committed publicly. And when you miss, the typical move is increase the pressure, tighten reporting, raise the stakes, add consequences. So accountability can absolutely work, but it borrows force from the outside. It doesn't automatically build the internal capability to gather the promise once the structure is gone. The fourth strategy is systems design. Over the last decade, this has become one of the most mainstream answers to New Year's change. routines, behavior design, and the mechanics of making follow-through repeatable. This approach basically says, build a system once and then let the system carry you. So if we go back to the three forces, pull, push, and bridge, systems design is mostly about strengthening the bridge force. Not what you want and not how hard you push, but the mechanism that makes the action happen. Your routine, your environment, your cue, your setup. The mainstream exemplars here are people like James Clear and Charles Duhigg, the behavior design crowd. With our example, training 3 times a week, the systems version sounds like, I train Monday, Wednesday, Friday. My gear is laid out before I go to bed. As soon as I wake up, I get in the car and go straight to the gym, follow a set routine, and then tick it off. So what does systems design produce? In the moment, it produces structure. You reduce deciding, negotiating, and overthinking because the next step is already set. Follow-through becomes more repeatable. Over time, it can start to run on autopilot. You do it without debating it, and you can build routine-specific competence. You get good at that routine and that setup because you've repeated it enough times. But here's the limitation. Systems design works best when your routine is stable and the resistance to do it is low. So it breaks in 2 predictable ways. First, when the routine stops matching your week. Travel, sickness, a schedule shift, new responsibilities. The routine was designed for one set of conditions and now you're living in another. Second, when resistance or competition shows up. You wake up tired, work runs late. Something meaningful competes, work, family, an unexpected priority. A routine can't negotiate that moment. It either runs smoothly or it gets bumped. And when you miss, systems design usually has the best repair move of any mainstream strategy. You don't moralize it, you debug it. You adjust the cue, shrink the action, simplify the routine, and resume. So systems design is a genuinely powerful bridge, and for many people it's the best resolution upgrade they ever make. But it's usually a single force bridge. It makes the execution more automatic under the conditions it was designed for. When the week changes or priorities collide, automaticity can't adapt. It either runs or it breaks. And that's the setup for part 2. So let's zoom out. We've now seen the 4 mainstream ways people try to make a resolution survive. Inspiration leans on pull, care, meaning, vision. Discipline leans on push, willpower, rules, toughness. Accountability and stakes leans on external push, pressure, consequences, being watched. And systems design leans on bridge, routines and structure that make action repeatable. And to be fair, any of these can work. Each one is pointing at something real. But here's the pattern. A resolution has 3 forces in it: pull, push, and bridge. And these mainstream strategies tend to be well developed in one, but underdeveloped in the other 2. That's why the failure patterns are so predictable. Inspiration collapses when resistance shows up. Discipline collapses when complexity piles up. Accountability collapses when the structure disappears or you start pushing back. And systems design collapses when the week changes or priorities collide. So the core claim of this video is simple. Most resolutions fail because people use a 1-force strategy for a 3-force promise. Now what's missing from the mainstream list is the thing that can hold all 3 at once. A system can be a bridge, but it's usually a single force bridge. It works when life stays fairly stable. The time is there, the energy is there, and nothing major collides. A 3-force bridge is different. It's what you do when the week changes, when you're tired, the calendar blows up, or something important competes, and you still keep the promise intact. It's the ability to stay connected to what matters, pull, tell the truth about the conditions you're in, push, and adjust the method so the promise still holds, bridge. That governing capability is what I mean by self-authorship. Inspiration, discipline, accountability, and systems are tools, good ones. Self-authorship is what uses them and keeps the promise intact when you miss, when resistance shows up, and when life changes. Next week in part 2, I'll show you what that looks like in practice. But before we get there, here's a quick way you can check whether your resolution is actually built to survive. I want to give you a 2-minute check you can run on any resolution. You can do it in your head or write it down. Either way, this tells you whether your resolution is actually built to survive real life. Think of it like a stress test. If you fail one, that's not a moral issue. It just tells you what's missing. Test 1, the pull test. Pull is what draws you forward, what you're moving toward and why it matters to you. So here's the test. Can you say in one sentence what you're doing and why you actually care? What difference will it make in your life? If your why is basically I should, it won't pull you on a hard day. Test 2, the push test. Push is what your life reliably throws at this promise: your schedule, energy, constraints, and usual friction points. So here's the test. Can you name the 2 most predictable moments this resolution will fail? The conditions where you usually don't follow through. If you can't name them, you're designing for a fantasy week. Example: this breaks when I'm exhausted and when work runs late. Test 3, the bridge test. Bridge is the method that turns the promise into action in your real week. So here's the test. When those push moments show up, do you have a plan that still runs? And do you have a fallback plan? The minimum version you'll do instead of collapsing into zero. Example: if I get home late, I do 12 minutes, not 0. Test 4, the miss test. This is the one most people never write down. The miss test is what you do after the first slip, before the slip becomes a slide. So here's the test. If you miss once, what's your next move? Specifically, not try harder, a real restart rule. Example: if I miss, I do the next workout as soon as I can, even if it's the minimum version, and then I continue. And here's the point. If you pass all 4 tests, you don't just have a resolution, you've got something that can survive your week. If you fail one, you've just found the reason your last attempt probably collapsed. Next week in part 2, I'll show you what makes self-authorship different and how to build a 3-force bridge that survives a real week. Subscribe so you don't miss it. This is Training for a Better Week, weekly training for self-authorship, so your weeks actually go the way you mean.